They say that some towns remember what their people want to forget. In the case of Ashford County, Kentucky, the memory lies buried beneath damp soil, sealed in the pages of a coroner's report that was never meant to see daylight. On an April morning in 1967, a fisherman on the banks of the Green River found something lodged against the roots of a cypress tree. 3 children, pale as bone, their hands clasped together as if they'd been waiting for someone to come back for them. Their names were Margaret, Thomas, and June Ashford, ages 9, 7, and 5. Hello everyone, before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The town froze. The sheriff's office roped off the area, reporters circled, and within days the name, Ashford, was whispered in every home, every church pew, every sleepless kitchen at midnight. But the shock wasn't that the children had died. It was that no one could agree on when. The bodies were perfectly preserved, as though the river had refused to touch them. The coroner's notes, what few pages survived, described their condition in words that don't fit within the laws of nature. No sign of decay, he wrote, eyes intact, blood thickened, not drained. The Ashford farmhouse still stood on the edge of town, half swallowed by kudzu, the curtains drawn since 1959, the last time anyone claimed to see the family alive. The father, Henry Ashford, had been a decorated war veteran turned preacher. His wife, Eliza, taught Sunday school. They were the kind of family people pointed to when they wanted to believe in decency. Until they vanished. For 8 years, the house sat empty, doors nailed shut, windows broken and boarded. The county listed it as abandoned property. But someone kept the grass trimmed, someone left milk bottles on the porch, and sometimes, neighbors said, they heard a woman's voice humming from the upstairs window, the same hymn Eliza used to sing in church, soft, sorrowful, and slightly off-key. When the children were found, the county thought it was a tragic end to a long, unsolved disappearance. But what happened next, the days after the discovery, would unravel the quiet history of Ashford County. Because what the sheriff's men found inside that farmhouse was not a home. It was a mausoleum, and the evidence they unearthed suggested the children may never have left it in the first place. The first deputy through the Ashford farmhouse door was a man named Clyde Marin. He later said the air inside felt thick, like walking into a church that hadn't seen sunlight in 100 years. Dust hung motionless. Every clock had stopped at 3:17. Plates still rested on the table, arranged as if the family had just stepped away for a moment. But the strangest thing was the smell. Not rot, not mildew, something faintly sweet, like lilacs left too long in water. Upstairs, the bedrooms looked almost untouched. The children's beds were made. A row of toys sat perfectly aligned on a dresser, each coated in the same fine layer of gray dust. A Bible lay open on the floorboards to a single passage, Exodus 22:18. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Sheriff Halpern, who'd served in the war with Henry Ashford, turned pale when he saw that. Henry was obsessed with that verse. He whispered to one of the men, said there were things out here older than Christ that never died. In the master bedroom, the deputies found something no one could explain. The wallpaper was scorched in circular patterns, blackened as though by candle flame. But there were no candles and no signs of a fire. On the ceiling, written in what looked like chalk, were 3 words, "We were promised." The official story said the family disappeared during a storm in 1959, presumed swept away by floodwaters from the Green River. But the records didn't fit. No storm had been recorded that night. The roads were dry. The neighbors hadn't heard a thing. Henry's car remained parked in the barn, its engine intact, keys still in the ignition. There was no sign of struggle. Only absence, preserved like an empty photograph. The coroner's report on the children's bodies deepened the mystery. Their lungs contained no water. Their stomachs held food only half digested. Time of death, impossible to determine. He wrote in the margins, the organs are pristine. They should not be. When word of this spread through Ashford County, something shifted. Church attendance tripled. Doors that had once stayed unlocked were barred each night, and an old story, something whispered for generations, rose again. That the Ashford land had once been part of a burial ground, centuries before the town was even founded. A few of the older residents still remembered what their grandparents had said, that the soil there never gave back what it took. By the end of that first week, the Ashford property was crawling with state investigators. Reporters came from Louisville, Cincinnati, even as far as Chicago. But most of them left within a day, pale and shaken, unwilling to say exactly what they'd seen. The few photographs that survived were confiscated almost immediately. The negatives never surfaced. Sheriff Halpern filed his final statement on a Friday morning. By Monday, he had resigned and left town for good. He told a local pastor, his last recorded conversation, that he Wouldn't spend one more night in a county that doesn't sleep. What he meant by that would only become clear years later. The deeper they searched the farmhouse, the stranger the findings became. Beneath a loose floorboard in the parlor, they uncovered a wooden box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were pages torn from Eliza Ashford's diary, most dated between 1957 and 1959. Her handwriting was delicate, almost fragile. The entries began innocently, notes about the children, about Henry's sermons, the changing seasons. But as the pages went on, her tone fractured. One passage read, "Henry says the light in the field is not the devil. He says it's the promise. I saw it last night. It moved like breath, like something remembering it used to be alive." Another, "The children talk to her now. The woman in the corner. June says she smells like rain." The diary stopped abruptly on April 12, 1959, the same date the family vanished. The last words she ever wrote, "If we leave, she'll follow. If we stay, she'll take us whole." When after that, the investigation descended into chaos. The county coroner recanted his earlier statements, claiming his notes had been tampered with. The state police sealed the farmhouse and declared it condemned, though no structural issues were ever cited. Within months, the Ashford property was officially erased from the county registry, its parcel number missing, its deeds untraceable. Still, locals swore that every spring, when the Green River flooded, pieces of that house appeared downstream, boards etched with symbols, toys waterlogged but intact, a child's shoe or ribbon, always clean, always looking new, as if time had spared them too. And though most people refused to speak of it, there were a few who said they still saw the children, 3 pale figures near the tree line at dusk, standing hand in hand, waiting for something the living could never understand. In the summer of 1968, 1 year after the discovery, a man named Dr. Lowell Eddington arrived in Ashford County. He was a professor of anthropology from the University of Chicago, known for studying Appalachian folklore and burial customs. Officially, he was there to assist in historical context. But locals believed he'd come for reasons much darker. He rented a single room above the hardware store, spent his days combing through courthouse records, and his nights wandering the road toward the Ashford property. People said he never carried a flashlight. By autumn, he'd interviewed nearly everyone who'd known the Ashfords. His notes, found years later in an archive mislabeled as meteorological studies, describe a pattern he called familial containment. Families, he claimed, bound to certain pieces of land where death and time don't follow natural law. He traced the phenomenon back through generations of Ashfords to a man named William Ashford, who settled there in 1813. William's wife and 4 children had died within months of one another, their graves unmarked. The local church refused to bury them on consecrated ground. The reason, according to the earliest records, unnatural preservation. Eddington's papers suggested the land itself might have been part of an older network of ceremonial sites used by indigenous tribes, places meant not for worship, but for containment of what was once called the sleeping thing. The Ashfords, he theorized, had either stumbled upon it or inherited its guardianship, unknowingly maintaining a covenant too old for language. Then, on October 3, 1968, Eddington disappeared. His rented room was left unlocked. On his desk were 2 items, a map of the Ashford property and a single Polaroid photograph. The picture showed the 3 Ashford children standing at the edge of the Green River. Their eyes were open, and according to the date stamp, the photo had been taken 2 days before it was found. The sheriff's office denied its existence, but fragments of that image circulated quietly through the county, passed from hand to trembling hand until the paper yellowed and the edges tore away. Some said the photograph changed if you kept it too long. The children's heads tilted, their mouths parted. By winter, no one spoke the name Ashford aloud. The farmhouse was finally burned down by order of the state, but the fire didn't behave like fire. It burned cold, smoke without heat, light without flame. Witnesses said they heard voices inside, singing that same broken hymn Eliza once sang. The next morning, all that remained was soil, perfectly black, perfectly smooth. Not even ash. The county tried to move on, but Ashford had a way of coming back. In 1974, a construction crew broke ground just 2 miles from where the farmhouse once stood, preparing to lay foundations for a new subdivision. By noon the first day, the foreman called the project off. The men refused to keep digging. They said the soil blood. When the state sent inspectors, they reported finding no trace of blood, only a thick red clay unlike any other in the region, heavy with iron and salt. But the locals weren't convinced. They knew that land. It had a pulse of its own. One worker, a man named Darrell Pike, told a reporter that he'd found something at the bottom of his trench, a child's handprint pressed into the clay, deep and perfect, as if it had just been made. Not long after, people in the surrounding area began to notice things. Electrical outages that followed no pattern. A low hum that traveled through the soil, rising at night. dogs refusing to cross the road near the old property line. The county finally fenced it off for public safety, though no official cause was listed. But the strangest reports came from the children. They started seeing the Pale family. 3 siblings who stood by the water's edge, holding hands, watching. Sometimes they spoke. One little girl claimed they asked her a question, "Does your mother still sing?" Sheriff Halpern, who had long since moved north, returned to Ashford County in 1975. He was sick by then, throat cancer, some said, and had begun writing down what he remembered. In his unfinished notes, he admitted something the public had never known: the children's bodies found in 1967 had vanished from county storage less than a week after discovery. No forced entry, no paperwork. Just gone, he wrote. If they were taken, it wasn't by human hands. I've seen things that don't belong to time. When Halpern died the following spring, his personal effects were boxed and stored in the courthouse basement. They remained there for decades until the flood of 1992 unearthed them again. Pages warped, ink running like veins across the paper. Among them was a sketch, the Ashford children, standing before the river. Behind them, drawn faintly in pencil, a 4th figure. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? By the time the 1990s arrived, Ashford County had learned to live with its silence. The land was fenced off, renamed, and marked as state property. Maps printed after 1980 omitted the name entirely, yet every few years, someone would stumble too close. Curiosity, rebellion, or maybe something else pulling them toward that soil. In 1993, a group of college students from Lexington decided to document the legend for a class project. They brought cameras, flashlights, tape recorders. Only one of them, a Grayson, was ever found. She was discovered 3 miles from the old Ashford site, barefoot, her skin covered in streaks of red clay. When she finally spoke, weeks later, she said, "They're not dead. They're waiting for the rest of us to forget." She never elaborated. She never returned to school. Local authorities dismissed it as hysteria. But in the months that followed, the town experienced something it hadn't seen in generations: a drought. The Green River shrank into a trickle, exposing the riverbed for the first time in living memory. And there, half buried in the mud, they found pieces of the past, fragments of children's shoes, a small wooden cross, and the corroded frame of what looked like an old camera. Inside, its film was intact. The photos, when developed, showed the same image again and again: the river, the tree line, and in the distance, the faint outline of 3 figures, hand in hand, staring toward the lens, every frame slightly closer than the last. The negatives were sent to Frankfurt for analysis. They never came back. A retired journalist named Carl Henley, who'd covered the 1967 discovery, later claimed he'd seen one of those photos before it disappeared. He said it wasn't just the children in the image. There was someone standing behind them, an adult, or something shaped like one. It looked like a shadow that remembered being human, he said in a taped interview shortly before his death. And it looked like it knew my name. After that, even the mention of Ashford became taboo. Preachers warned against saying the family's name out loud in church. Parents taught their children to cross themselves when passing the Green River. But the silence didn't erase the memory. It preserved it, like the bodies in the water, untouched by time, waiting to be seen again. And some nights, when the fog rolls low across the valley, fishermen still claim they hear the same sound that started it all: 3 voices, soft and sweet, humming an old church hymn that hasn't been sung in 60 years. The Ashford story might have ended there, faded into rumor, softened into myth. But history doesn't forget what's buried in its own skin. In 2014, county developers proposed reopening the land for industrial use. The site survey was routine soil sampling, groundwater testing, drone mapping. Everything went as planned until the final pass over the old Ashford parcel. The drone feed went white, static, then silence, and when the footage reappeared, it showed an image no one could explain. For a single frame, less than half a second, there were faces, 3 of them. Eyes open, mouths closed, skin like porcelain. The timestamp on the footage matched the exact hour of the day the Ashford children had been found. April 9th, 10:43 a.m. The lead surveyor, a man named Patrick Yates, quit his job the next morning. He mailed his resignation in an unmarked envelope with a single note inside: "The ground breathes." Later that year, the county quietly abandoned the project. The official explanation was environmental instability, but those who saw the raw drone feed knew better. And when one of the survey team died in his sleep a few weeks later, no cause, no struggle, no sign of illness, the old whispers came rushing back. Afterward, local archives were reopened to the public for the first time in decades. Someone, no one knows who, had filed a set of missing documents under a false name: the Ashford continuation. Inside were the last pages of Elisa's diary, thought to have been lost in the fire. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smeared, but the message was clear. She said the promise was never to die, only to wait, only to remember. Some believe she referred to whatever the Ashfords had found in that field, the thing older than language, older than the land itself. Others think Eliza was speaking to herself, or to the echo of something she couldn't escape. The county sealed the records again within a month. But people talk. Farmers near the Green River still find fresh footprints where no one's walked for miles. Hollow laughter in the trees, the smell of lilacs on nights when nothing should bloom. And when the moonlight hits the water just right, some say you can still see them, 3 children, waiting on the shore. They don't move, they don't fade. They're patient, and if you look long enough, they'll turn their heads toward you, just to see if you remember their names. Because the Ashfords never left Ashford County. The county left them. And the soil, the river, the quiet dark. They remember everything.